Vanakkam. Hello friends. We saw in the previous episode of how Brahmi was the first deciphered script of the Indian subcontinent and how it was deciphered thanks to the genius of James Prinsep. Though it was initially discovered on coins, it was the reading of Emperor Ashoka's rock edicts throughout the country that made it popular, and hence the Brahmi script came to be known as Ashokan Brahmi or Mauryan Brahmi. Prakrit was the language used, and scholars opined that it should be named after the language and the script rather than a ruler or a dynasty, and hence the correct name would be Prakrit Brahmi rather than Ashokan Brahmi or Mauryan Brahmi. After all, Emperor Ashoka nor his Mauryan dynasty had anything to do with the invention of Brahmi. The unknown origin of the script is still under debate, and some of the recent archaeological discoveries in the Tamil country have thrown up further challenges. The dating of the script has eluded scholars for a long time, as most of the inscriptions were found on non-perishable materials like rock surfaces or metal coins, and hence could not be scientifically analyzed and scrutinized for carbon dating. Thus, the dating of the script depended upon paleography, that is the study of ancient writing, orthography, the study of spellings, and archaeological stratigraphy that generated much debate among epigraphists and archaeologists due to its ambiguity. In the case of Tamil country, the discovery of writing follows a peculiar reverse chronological sequence. Two of the scripts that were first identified were the cursive Vatteluthu, which was prevalent all around the Pandya kingdom from the beginning of the 5th century AD, and a little later from the 7th century AD, the prevalence of the Pallava Tamil. Now, two facts puzzled scholars. Why were two scripts in usage in a contemporaneous time period for writing a language? And secondly, with a corpus of literature that was over 2000 years old, how come there were no written scripts before this time period? Of course, one reason being the medium of writing, the perishable palm leaf manuscript, as we have seen earlier, and we never made use of the perishable clay, which upon burning became imperishable and hence helped preserve the ancient records of the Egyptian and Mesopotamian dynasties. And though the Indus scripts also were found in the clay, they were far from a complete script, as they were mostly found on seals. Dr. Dilip K. Chakrabarty, the Emeritus Professor of the Department of South Asian Archaeology, Cambridge University, UK, points out how certain inscriptions in North India implied the fact that there were administrative storehouses of records. But as they were written on the birch leaf, that is the Burj Patra, they were again lost to us, unlike a Hammurabi's code that the Indians prefer to write on the palm leaf well up to the end of the 19th century is proved by the fact that during the British rule, when the population census was ordered, Indian census recorders of that period returned the proformas inscribed on the palm leaf. And here in Madurai, still in this 21st century, there is a street by the name Elutani Karatheru in the town area, Elutani being the tool that was used to inscribe on the palm leaf, indicating that such scribes should have lived here till at least a century ago. Dr. Chakrabarty points out another interesting fact that is food for thought. Sringaverapura is an ancient site on the banks of the Ganges, not far upstream of Allahabad. During archaeological excavations at this site, from the black and redware pottery level, now these have been carbon dated to 800 BCE, certain fragments of birch leaf were discovered. Dr. Chakrabarty points out how the birch leaf is native to the Himalayan mountains, and the nearest place, the Garwar hills, from which they could have been brought, was still hundreds of kilometers away from Allahabad. So what would have been the point of importing them all the way to Sringaverapura unless they were used for writing purposes? He feels that this offers solid circumstantial proof that writing definitely existed in pre-Ashokan times in ancient India. Here, I am reminded of a fact recorded by Manonmaniyam Sundaram Pillai in 1894 that large amount of palm leaves were taken away by the Jainist and Buddhist monks, and many of them were stored in Tibetan monasteries where they were in better condition because of the cold climate and lack of termites. Tamil scholars would do well to go and search for them, he writes. But it breaks one's heart to realize that during the Chinese invasion of Tibet in the 1950s, the Chinese ended up destroying over 6,000 monasteries and set on fire lakhs of palm leaf manuscripts, history and literature lost to us forever. We also know that it was common knowledge that even here in the Tamil country, every year, just before Pongal during Bogi, people had the habit of gathering all the ancient palm leaves lying around in their house and either burning them or throwing them away in the rivers. So, right till the beginning of the 20th century, Vatteluthu and the Pallava Tamil letters were the only written scripts found here. Why? Because the only other major source of script was the Brahmi script, inscriptions found on rock surfaces and caves, but these were all thought to be Prakrit. Again, why? They were mostly written by or dedicated to Jain and Buddhist monks who had come from the north and who were not conversant with Tamil. So it was assumed that the script was Prakrit. We saw in the previous episode of how the first Brahmi inscriptions were found by Robert Sewell in the year 1882 at Mangulam near Madurai. Having assumed that it was Prakrit, the inscription could not be read, and it was also noticed that they had a few strange characters. The noted epigraphist K.V. Subramanya Iyer rediscovered Mangulam in 1906 and undertook a lot of research, and in a paper that he published in 1924, he established that indeed it was Brahmi script, but the language was Tamil, and he was able to identify the strange characters as the Sirappu Ragaram of Tamil, Ir and In. Well, we saw how Damili was mentioned as a script in Jaina and Buddhist Lipi records, attesting to the ancient presence of a Tamil script, while Airavada Mahadevan called it the Tamil Brahmi. There are also scholars who prefer to call it the Tamili script. Then followed a series of discoveries and rereadings, and it should be understood that except in ancient Tamilagam, which comprises today's Kerala and Tamil Nadu, everywhere else in the country, the Brahmi script was used only for Prakrit language. And all over India today, over 1 lakh cave inscriptions have been discovered, and more than 60,000 of these inscriptions are in Tamil country, meaning that they are written predominantly in Tamil Brahmi, some in Vatteluthu, of course with a smattering of Prakrit words mixed here and there. Now, some of these old Tamil Brahmi inscriptions revealed names of kings, poets, places and heroes, and these could be correlated to names mentioned in the Sangam literary works, and for the first time there was concrete evidence to better correlate and date the time period of these literary works. The Mangulam inscriptions that are dated to the 2nd century BCE read as follows: Kani Nanda Asriya Kuv Anke Thammam Itta a Nedunjeliyan. Now this roughly translates to, this is a charity to Nandasiri Kuvan the Kani, the bed caused to be carved by Kadalan Valudi, the servant of Nedunjeliyan. So for the first time, here we had concrete evidence of the famed Pandya king Nedunjeliyan, hero of Sangam works. We saw last time how the Jambai inscription dated to the 1st century AD was helpful in identifying that the Satyaputos formed the lineage of the famed Adiyaman of Tahadur. Similarly, in Pugalur near Karur, which was the capital of the ancient Cheras, a series of inscriptions were discovered, and in a place called Velayudam Palayam in the Arunatar Malai, about 12 inscriptions were discovered, of which one particular inscription was of great importance. Why? Because it gave the lineage of a Chera line known as the Irumporais, who were Sangam age kings. The inscription read, Muda Amanan Yatrur Sengayaban Urai Ko Adan Sel Irumporai Mahan Perungadungo Mahan Izhangkadungo Aha Aruttakal. This roughly translates to the senior Jain monk Sengayaban of Yatrur. The rock shelter was carved when Izhangkadungo, son of Perungadungo, the son of King Adansel Irumborai, became the heir apparent. Well, 3 generations of Chera kings are mentioned in this inscription, and out of the 8 anthologies, that is the Etuthogai Noolgal of Sangam literature, the Paditru is a work dedicated to singing the praises of the Chera kings. They are divided into 10 cantos with 10 stanzas each in praise of one particular king. Of course, today we have not been able to recover the first and the last cantos. However, these 3 dynasty kings were identified as the heroes of the 7th, 8th and 9th cantos of the Paditru. The next source of these inscriptions happened to be menhirs and hero stones, and Tamil country had a continuous tradition of raising the menhirs, that is the Nedungal, and the hero stones, that is the Nadukkal, for its fallen heroes right from Iron Age, about which we've seen a lot. I will leave the relevant links here. Some of these carried graffiti, a kind of pictorial script, and some of these carried Tamil Brahmi. A very important discovery in relatively recent times is that of a clutch of menhirs found in megalithic urn burial fields in the Upper Vaigai Valley. Dr. Rajan and team undertook a research of the Upper Vaigai Valley, jointly funded by the University Grants Commission and the Ford Foundation. On the banks of the Vaigai, about 19 kilometers from Vettilaikundu, which is today better known as Vathalakundu, 3-foot-high stones that were part of an urn burial complex were recovered, found in large numbers in an area known as Vepamarathukkadu. These stones had been removed as the lands were levelled for cultivational purposes, and some of these stones had inscriptions. All the memorial stones were discovered a few kilometers from the west of Madurai on the banks of river Vaigai and were close to the trade route connecting the Pandyan capital with the Chera country on the western side of the Western Ghats, points out Dr. Rajan. In a hero stone found at Tatampatti, it reads, In Adi Von Pahal Pali, where Pali means a bed. In a place called Puliman Kombe, 3 hero stones were recovered having inscriptions in Tamil Brahmi, and one of these hero stones mentions the Aanire Kavardal, that is the cattle raiding, and this generated a lot of interest as these inscriptions were considered to be older than that of the Mangulam inscriptions. Dated between the 2nd century and 3rd century BCE, the first hero stone, which is found only in fragments, has the lines Anvur Adan in Ankal, where the name of the person in whose honor it was erected or the name of the place itself could not be ascertained as the stone was damaged. The second hero stone has 3 lines that read Kal Ped Thiyan Andavan Kudalur Ahol, which means it was put up in memory of Thiyan Andavan of the Pedur village, the hero who died in a cattle raid at Kudalur. The term Agol, meaning cattle raid, we have seen many instances in Sangam literature which talk of the different kinds of cattle raids, and here was an inscriptional evidence of a fallen hero who actually gave up his life in one of the raids. The third stone read as follows, Velvur Avvan Padavan, meaning it was raised in memory of Padavan Avvan of Velur. According to Airavada Mahadevan, the style of writing and orthography were very similar to that of the Mangulam inscriptions, and he felt that the first inscription being older than the 2, the last 2 inscriptions were dated to around 3rd century BCE. Though these kind of hero stones are found all around India, the earliest and oldest inscriptions on them is found only in Tamil country, and this is a custom that followed with the Tamil people for hundreds of years well into the medieval period. And Sangam literary works give a lot of descriptions on how these hero stones were erected and worshipped for kings and chieftains. In the Purana Nuru song 232 and 233, composed by the court poetess of Adiyaman Neduman Anji Avvayar, she sings Nadugal Pili Sutti Narari Sirugalathu Uhappavum Kolvan Kollo. After Adiyaman passed away and his body was inturned to flames, A Nadukal, a hero stone, was erected in his honor, and it was decorated with peacock feathers, and people offered him toddy and food in small cups. So, here is the evidence in hero stones strewn across Tamil country that correlates to the Sangam literature. Dr. Dilip K. Chakrabarty points out to a serious rift in the study of ancient history and archaeology between North and South India, and this dichotomy is most evident in the search for the beginning of writing in the subcontinent, more specifically in the origin of the Brahmi. And he feels that one of the main reasons for this is the lack of familiarity of the South Indian languages among North Indian scholars and vice versa. He points out to a few instances in the north where Brahmi scripts predating Ashokan Brahmi have been discovered, like in the Saugora inscription of eastern Uttar Pradesh, and how even eminent scholars such as D.C. Sirkar put up a resistance in accepting anything that was pre-Ashokan. Today, discoveries in the Tamil country have provided solid proof that writing and the Brahmi existed definitely prior to Ashoka, and the biggest game changer has been the humble potsherds with graffiti and Brahmi inscriptions discovered in hordes in the thousands all over Tamil country. We will see about the history revealed by these potsherds in detail in the next episode. Vanakkam.